It is absolutely absurd to me that a company would release a smartphone that is so good, in fact to be fair, in a series that was so good, and then just can it after 1 year. However you want to frame it, this phone went hard, it was a bop, and I, along with so many other people, just wish they'd make a follow-up. It seems simple enough, so why haven't they done it? Well, that's interesting actually. But before that guys, I'm desperately trying to hit 100,000 subscribers, so if you wouldn't mind hitting that button, genuinely mean the absolute world to me. Thank you so much. This is a phone from what many, including myself, call the golden era. 2019, pre-lockdown. It's one of the best phones Samsung ever made, of course, the Galaxy S10e. I'm not going to lie to you, the S10 series might be the best set of smartphones ever released. It was incredible. The perfect blend of old school and new school. It doesn't look outdated even in 2024, almost 6 years after release, and I know way more people holding on to one of these series smartphones than any iPhone or even Pixel. Now, on paper this is only about 5% shorter than the modern day S24, and fractions of a millimeter narrower and slightly thicker. So if the sole reason you like the S10e is because of its size, then technically Samsung still makes a phone for you. It's called the base model S24. I know in photos and in renders that phone looks quite a bit bigger, but it is actually so close to this in dimensions that you probably wouldn't feel those in the real world. Small phones are amazing, and it seems like the vocal minority online seem to want them, as most people are actually buying bigger phones. And that is why you see so many flagships that are just ginormous, because the general public has voted with its wallet, and the S10e feels especially nice in the hand because of its curves and tapers, which aid in ergonomics that are weirdly being phased out of smartphones these days, which I find utterly ridiculous. However, size is only a small part of the story here. Having a name like S10e might push you to think that this is some sort of cut down or otherwise compromised version of the S10, and given Samsung makes its FE line, which is basically just that, you'd be forgiven for thinking this way. But aside from a couple of really small areas, that was not the case with the S10e. And instead it was a brilliant compact version of an excellent flagship that we got back in 2019, and it was a doozy. There were a lot of firsts for Samsung with this phone in particular. It was the first Galaxy S to have an ultra-wide rear camera, the first to have a punch hole camera and not a chin or a forehead. It was the first to come in gorgeous bold colours, and the first to have a capacitive fingerprint reader on the side of the chassis. But the S10e was also where a lot of lasts happened for the Galaxy S line of smartphones. It was the final phone to retain both the headphone port and microSD expansion, though in the S20 you could get the slot on its own. It was the final Galaxy S to come in truly vibrant colours, the last Galaxy S to have a display under 6 inches diagonally, the last one to have a variable aperture main camera system. More people than just me considers this to be the truly last great series of smartphones from Samsung in particular, and the S10e played its part in that. You guys already know that I absolutely adore smartphone cameras, and this one's interesting. So it really was never the best on any smartphone. It had the same size sensor as what you'd find in the competing Pixel, but the processing wasn't nearly as good, and the ultra-wide was decent in good light but pretty meh in less favourable conditions. This is not the time when Samsung reigned supreme in the smartphone camera debate, and the S10e's lack of 2x optical zoom setup looks way worse on paper than it actually translates to in real life. There's a reason why many devices we see today's telephoto cameras are 3 or 5 times or better, and that's because 2x in many circumstances looks just as good cropped into the main sensor as it does with a dedicated telephoto. That dual aperture thing was designed to give you the option of better low light performance and more bokeh, and then shut down for more sharpness across the scene when light is better. Now, this was and still is a pretty gimmicky thing in my opinion, though you will still find it on some smartphones in 2024, like the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, but since that sensor is 1-inch type instead of the 1/2.55 inch setup we have here, the effects are far more noticeable with the Xiaomi than the S10e. It's funny because early in-display fingerprint scanners were pretty weak, and that's what the S10 Plus and Plus 5G came with. And the more old school capacitive scanner on the S10e was way better, it was quicker, it was more accurate, and it's why to this day I still stand by my belief that the capacitive scanner on the side of the smartphone should be the way that we do it. Maybe built into the lock button like Motorola did for just so long. Let me know what you think of that in the comments, by the way. One of the main reasons people are holding on to their S10e is that adaptability that makes many older Samsung smartphones just so popular. The 3.5mm headphone port I know I bang on about a lot, but there is a sizable chunk of people who just demand it in their phone and one that's actually built in. They don't want to carry around any kind of dongle because that's just more appealing. And the microSD card slot, of course, is nice to have for transferring data, but also giving your phone a much needed bump in storage instead of having to settle up and just buy a bigger model. These are some crucial features for some people. I'm sure there will be Sony fanboys in my comment section telling me I don't know that the Sony Xperia phones exist. Guys, check the channel. I know that they exist. I've even reviewed them in the past. But their design language and software are so lacking for the general public that they just aren't viable options for many people. Like, there's a reason they're not popular. They can be very good phones in their own right, but you need to be a bit of a nerd or a bit of an enthusiast to fully enjoy what those phones offer. For a lot of the time, you just have to deal with so many compromises if you want a Sony phone with Sony features. The Galaxy S10e is refreshingly easy to use one-handed. I bought my unit off eBay for about £130, which the more I think about it, the more that is actually quite a steep price for this kind of thing. I love the canary yellow colour it comes in. Even the shiny rails are sort of tinted to match the rest of the phone, but there were some other gorgeous options for colours that this phone came in. My unit has a slightly loose rear glass element, which is something I've noticed when buying a lot of phones from this sort of era. I'm not sure if it's maybe a previous battery replacement that's been done, screen replacement, or maybe it's just at that age where a lot of the seals and gaskets dry up and you end up with backs that come off the phones. I don't know. It's very possible because with OLED screens, pretty much all of them, these are susceptible to the line issues that you might have seen in the comment sections of all of my OnePlus videos. I think a lot of people think that's a OnePlus thing. No, that's an OLED thing, and that happens a lot more than you'd think. This is not a perfect phone whatsoever, and the batteries that were already a bit meh when they came out are certainly going to need to be replaced now. It runs Android 12, which is 3 versions out of date by this point, but that is 3 versions higher than when it first released. It's not a device I particularly recommend to everyone, but I'm not going to stop you from buying one if you want. They are fantastic phones, but just watch out for those compatibility and security issues. The Galaxy S10e is a phone that has a pretty decent following, but for some reason, Samsung just refuses to make another. In fairness, the Galaxy S24 is way closer to it than you'd probably first think, but lacks the charm and functional features that made the E just so great. Samsung really did drop an absolute banger and then dipped when it launched the Galaxy S10 series, and the S10e in particular.